If you had asked me last week, I would have told you that I have an almost perfect life. A good job, a comfortable home, a loving and beautiful wife, and three of the most wonderful children you can imagine. The youngest of them sat in the back seat of my car as we slowly drove to our favorite park. Sweet, innocent, 19-month-old baby Cindy. I always got a shiver when Cindy started talking. She was just learning, you know. Of course, I've been through this twice before, with her brother and sister, but as much as I love and enjoy my children, if I had the chance, Cindy would be the last. So knowing that this might be the last time I would experience all those magical moments of parenthood made it especially poignant. Kindergarten, Dad. That's right, honey. It's a kindergarten. Wow. What the hell? It was indeed a kindergarten that we had just passed by. But how the hell did Cindy know this? She's smart, but she definitely doesn't know how to read yet. This mystery occupied me for the next 2 blocks, giving me a terrible feeling. I analyze a situation quickly, and, according to my friends, I have an amazing ability to collect a lot of facts and see all the possible options very quickly. 2 blocks later, the only possible explanation was that Cindy had already been to this daycare often enough to recognize it. The problem is that my stay-at-home wife never mentioned taking Cindy to daycare. We actually agreed to wait until she was 2 years old before doing this. This needed to be found out. As soon as it was safe to do so, I turned around and parked in the parking lot near the center. Any parent will tell you how long it takes to remove a baby from a car seat. Needless to say, today I was not the exception. It didn't help that my mind was confusedly racing the whole time. As I approached the doors, I planned how to do this. "Hi, my name is Mike. Do you recognize this little girl?" This might require some explanation. In the end, the decision was made for me when the young woman at the front desk smiled at the baby in my arms. "Hi, Cindy. What are you doing here on Tuesday? You usually come on Wednesdays, although I don't remember seeing you on our list for tomorrow." "Hi, I'm Martha. You must be Cindy's dad. Sarah, we've been hearing a lot about you." Told. How I had a normal conversation when my mind was racing around is beyond me. I think I told her that Cindy saw the place as we drove by and wanted to say hi to her friends. After a couple of minutes of polite conversation, I excused myself and returned to the car. No further thought was possible as I drove Cindy home. Sarah and I were married for 10 years, and we were the strongest couple you could imagine. The realization that she was keeping at least one secret from me tried to penetrate that statement, but I pushed it away. There must be a legitimate reason for the secret. I just didn't know which one yet. Unfortunately, I couldn't just ask her. Sarah was on an annual cruise with her favorite aunt and would be out of range until Saturday at best. Anyway, as I said, I married Sarah 12 years ago, after a 2-year courtship. We were like two peas in a pod, spiritual comrades in the full sense of the word. We were both not overly ambitious, but we knew exactly what we wanted from life: to see the world and have 2 children. So after 4 years of traveling and loving each other, she stopped taking birth control pills, and a few months later, we were expecting a baby. When we met, Sarah was working as a secretary for the owner of an electrical components factory. Shortly after the wedding, the economy took a downturn, and she was asked not to work on Wednesdays without pay. This suited both of us. Life became complete for us when James was born. Sarah happily became a housewife, and I happily became the sole breadwinner, a designer working for a bunch of idiots who couldn't recognize a good idea if it were shoved at them. No, don't go over that again, Mike. One day you will save enough money to open your own business, and then you will give orders yourself. Sarah took to motherhood like a ferret who spots an open trouser hem. We quickly became the happiest family in the area. Well, except for work. We had a small health problem when little James was about 3 months old. It turned out that Sarah was having difficulty producing enough milk. With the doctor's advice and mutual resolution to the problem, we resolved this with a combination of adding formula and a day of forced rest for her. I arranged for Sarah's widower mother to pick up Jamie from mid-morning on Wednesdays to give Sarah some rest. Sarah either stayed at home or attended adult classes. It was then that she resumed her childhood hobby of sewing. She soon became even busier, coordinating the design and construction of the home we ordered. Sarah loved it and enjoyed the opportunity to express her artistic side. She delayed weaning Jamie completely until he was almost 2 years old. A few minor issues delayed the completion of the house, but we were able to move in just in time for the birth of our second child, Jenny. Yes, Jenny was born when James was just over 2.5 years old. Life got better and better. The only time I didn't spend with the kids was when I showed Sarah how much I still loved her. Jenny was another calm child. We half expected milk supply problems and knew what to do when they arose. This time, Sarah weaned our little girl completely when she was about 18 months old. When I suggested a vasectomy because we already had 2 children, as we had planned, Sarah surprised me by suggesting we have a third. I resisted, I'll tell you honestly. We made a plan, and the birth of another child would delay its implementation. In the end, Sarah convinced me with easy logic. If 2 perfect children are good, then how happy will we be with 3? Cindy entered our ideal world 2 years and 6 months after Jenny was born. I don't want to paint a picture of absolute utopia. I had to work on getting my items to actually go into the laundry basket and not just around it. Sarah had to be careful not to clog the sink with her hair. Long hair is beautiful, but I have to admit, I'm amazed at how much it falls out every time Sarah brushes her hair. And we had a constant battle with razors. She constantly used mine on her legs and dulled the blade. These are just a few of the little annoying habits we've worked on to keep things harmonious. I once heard a saying that little things like leaving the cap on your toothpaste ruin the love in a marriage because most couples have already discussed major issues like religion and politics before getting married. I believed in this saying, and so did Sarah, and so we tried to minimize minor irritations. Sarah and I also had rare, more serious arguments. The first of these happened when James was about 16 months old, and for the stupidest reason. I came home to find that Sarah had used hair tinting mousse to dye James' hair red. She gave me the ridiculous explanation that she wanted to celebrate her Irish heritage by dressing James as a leprechaun for St. Patrick's Day. I had no problem with the idea, but I was against the idea of chemically changing our son's hair color. After a heated argument in which I first yelled at her, we agreed that in the future such things should be discussed and agreed upon in advance. Another argument occurred about a year ago, shortly after her mother's sudden death. Sarah suggested sending Cindy to daycare on Wednesdays so she could have a completely child-free day. I strongly opposed the idea, unable to bear the thought of Cindy being cared for by a stranger and upset by the separation. Besides, now that the older 2 were in school or daycare, Sarah only had to care for one child, 6 hours a day. Like all good couples, we found a compromise. I will consider daycare once Cindy is 2 years old and emotionally ready for it. Plus, I offered to take care of the kids every weekend so Sarah could have a free day. I was glad that she almost never took advantage of this offer because after the work week and all the obligatory chores, I admit, I wanted to play with the children, not organize them. Moreover, her lack of requests proved, in my opinion, that she could do without rest. Another source of concern is Sarah's hints from Cindy's first birthday that she was ready to have a 4th child. It's strange considering we discussed this early in our marriage, deciding we'd try to have 2, and have already stretched it to 3. For months, Sarah raised this issue at every opportunity. She was worse than a used car salesman. It's funny because when I asked why she changed her mind, she couldn't give me a convincing answer. Discussions continued, but I was determined to stand my ground. Luckily, she has calmed down in the last few weeks. Hopefully, that meant I dodged a bullet. I was one of 6 children, and my father died as soon as I, the youngest, left home. The poor guy worked all his life and never had time to rest at the end. I didn't want to repeat his fate. Just as we were passing through a small shopping area near our home, I saw something that shocked me. It was a new electronic sign above a gas station, boldly telling everyone that didn't know it already that it was Tuesday, the 1st of May, along with the time and the temperature. Today is Tuesday. Tomorrow is Wednesday. Wednesdays. For the first 5 years of our marriage, Sarah worked every weekday except Wednesday. After James was a few months old, Sarah left him in the care of her mother. On Wednesdays, this continued until her mother died last year. Now I discovered that she left little Cindy at daycare once a week on Wednesdays. The result, my wife had about 6 hours of free time every Wednesday, and this continued for about 10 years. There must be a simple, innocent reason why I was deceived by a woman whom, until that moment, I considered absolutely incapable of deception. Some gut feeling, told me that it wasn't just a matter of taking a day off from motherhood. I cursed my gut instinct because now there was a huge and growing seed of doubt in me, and I hated it. I wanted so badly to just pick up the phone and ask her what the reason was. Calm your mind. Burn the nascent seedling of doubt inside me, but I couldn't. Sarah was out of range until Saturday. Let me explain. Even before our wedding, Sarah left once a year to visit her aunt, who lives in England. But she did not go to England every time. Usually, and every time for the past 8 years, Sarah would go somewhere to join her aunt on a cruise. The Mediterranean Sea, the West Indies, Alaska, she has been everywhere. I remember one day I asked her how much it cost, but she explained that her aunt was quite wealthy and was paying for everything. At the time, I wondered if these annual trips were a way to maintain good relations with my aunt and increase the chances of inheritance. Almost immediately, I dismissed the thought. Now I wasn't so sure. When children arrived, she tailored trips around them. She froze the expressed milk and left me fresh jars of formula. Cindy's recent weaning was, in part, due to her current trip. I've never met my aunt, only talked to her on the phone a few times. Was I offended by the fact that Sarah left the family once a year? Hell no. She deserved it. I took that week off and the kids and I had our own fun. Since I work to live and don't live to work, I spent this week playing housekeeper, doing school routes, and cooking dinner. I loved it, so giving up one of my 4 vacation weeks wasn't a burden. Plus, once she recovered from the inevitable jet lag, it was worth all the effort, if you know what I mean. According to Sarah, they should now be off the coast of Antarctica, where telephones definitely don't work. Not surprising. Catch someone in one lie and everything they've ever told you becomes suspect. How did I know she was on a cruise ship off the coast of Antarctica? Because she showed us pictures when she came back and told us stories. This is undeniable, isn't it? There was an easy way to find out. I remembered Sarah calling her aunt a week ago from her home phone. I flipped through his memory and found an English number. Without thinking, I pressed the call again. The call went on for about 6 times before I remembered the time difference. It was about 1 a.m. there. I was about to hang up the phone to minimize my extremely antisocial behavior when the answering machine came on. Hey, you've reached The Simpsons. Pete and I are currently on a cruise off the coast of Antarctica. You can reach us on my cell phone as of May 3rd. It was good, wasn't it? She was actually on a cruise. The problem is that this new shady character is wondering who Pete is and why isn't Sarah mentioned. Then, of course, there was the fact that my aunt returned on the 3rd and my wife only on the 6th. I really wanted to stop the doubts gnawing at me. Sarah and the kids are my life, but this mystery was like an itch that I just couldn't help but scratch. I couldn't leave her alone. I desperately wanted answers. Photo albums. On the album shelf were individual small books with photographs of annual cruises. I took it last year and opened it. Here is the beach in Cancun. Here is her aunt in front of a huge ship in Barbados. Here is her aunt at dinner at the officer's table, surrounded by snow-white uniforms and gold braids. After flipping through each page, I did not find what I was looking for. Eager to prove Sarah's veracity, I picked up the second album, then the third, then the fourth. My wife was not in any of the photographs. If I were suspicious, this would seem very strange to me. Guess what? Why had I never noticed this obvious fact before? Because I've never been suspicious before. Desperate to prove that my growing doubts were unfounded, I racked my brains trying to find another way to prove Sarah's innocence of all charges. Her car. For as long as I can remember, Sarah would always take a late flight to meet her aunt. This meant that she took a taxi to the airport, or, as this time, drove her car and left it in the long-term airport parking lot. I pulled out folders with Sarah's personal savings and credit accounts from the files. Luckily, each album had dates on it, allowing me to quickly focus on the corresponding weeks. I knew from experience that long-term parking cost $85 for 7 days. 10 minutes later, I did not find any amounts even close to this in any of the accounts. I made it to the fourth last trip, working my way back, before I noticed anything else strange. During the 8 or 9 days of her absence, there was not a single expense in the accounts. I knew my aunt paid for everything, but not a single cup of coffee during the trip. Suspicion grew. I needed to find out. By then, Cindy was already awake. I absent-mindedly called my sister and asked if she could babysit for a couple of hours. As usual, she was delighted. I drove the chatty little one away, promising myself that she would never know that she was the reason for the only time I doubted my wife. Hopefully after today, I can erase this from my memory as a slightly awkward episode in a long and happy marriage. I headed to the airport. Luckily, we live in a small regional town. I parked in a short-term parking lot, sandwiched between two long-term ones. Previously, there were pastures for sheep, but now there were cars parked here in rows for hundreds of meters. Choosing a direction at random, I started walking. After 45 minutes, I knew that Sarah's car was not there. So where is she? On the way back, different plans came into my head. Did I suspect enough to contact a lawyer to confirm what I already suspected? Namely, that a divorce awaits me and I will be at a disadvantage. I've been aware for some time now that I seem to be the only citizen in my country, Literaticland, in case you're wondering who doesn't have a lawyer friend. Bummer. Data. I need more facts. And quickly, before the seedling of doubt in my head grows so large that it breaks through the skin of my skull. Arriving home an hour before the children had to be picked up from school, I did the only thing that came to mind. I began to search the house from top to bottom. Why, I didn't know exactly, but perhaps something would catch my eye as inappropriate. Sarah loved the house. She worked closely with the architect on his design and then supervised the builders. Technically, the house was 3 stories high. Built on a slope, the entrance was on the main level, where there was a kitchen, guest room, dining room, main living room, and 1 bathroom. The top floor had a family room, 4 bedrooms, and 2 bathrooms. Because of the layout, there was plenty of space underneath the house for a storage room and Sarah's sewing room. They were accessed from the rest of the house by a steep, narrow staircase. Since the sewing room was the only space in the house that belonged only to Sarah, it was an obvious place to start. By the time I had to leave for school, I knew one thing: there was nothing suspicious in her sewing room. Everything there was standard for a hobby. I even checked the desktop for hidden compartments, feeling a little stupid. Leaving Sarah's sewing room, I looked into the storage room, accessible through a short corridor, but realized that searching it would have to wait until the next day. I noticed that, being a semi-basement, the place was quite dark, even in the middle of the day. I was distracted as I collected my 3 treasures and prepared dinner for them. Not at all like usual. After everyone had gone to bed, I pulled out an old baby monitor, placed it in Cindy's room, and took the portable part and went back down to the lower level. In the pantry, I moved and opened each box. Still nothing suspicious. Back upstairs, I checked on the kids before settling into my favorite chair, staying up late into the night, thinking. The next morning, I was even less cheerful as I dropped off the older kids at their schools and Cindy at daycare. Yes, you heard right. Cindy seemed to like it, so off we went. The other woman at the counter was surprised that we arrived, but checked and said everything was fine. A few subtle questions from Detective Mike confirmed that Cindy was usually picked up around 2:30 and that she had been attending the daycare for the past 7 months. My almost anger at my wife's deception grew and grew. I wondered what excuse she would come up with if Cindy ever mentioned the word kindergarten when I asked her about one day's happiness. I sat in the car with my head on the steering wheel. What else could I have done to get to the bottom of Sarah's alleged deception? I couldn't wait for her to come back so I could confront her. The lack of answers was driving me crazy. I didn't find anything while searching the house. But maybe I missed something. There must be something that explains everything. Having made my decision, I hurried back home. Starting with the guest bedroom, then the master bedroom, I checked every area that could be checked, even before checking for hidden panels in closets or drawers. Nothing. I started my home computer and searched all the directories. Nothing again. Sarah didn't have access to my work laptop, so there was no point in checking it. Unless there was anything in Sarah's car or her phone, there seemed to be nothing to be found. So what is the reason for her hiding the kindergarten? And where is her damn car? Where is my wife, and what did she do on Wednesdays? Annoyingly angry, I still didn't understand. It was only 1:15, so I had time to start the only thing I could think of. Going down to the basement, I started all over again. There must be something I'm missing. This time I actually moved the workbench and checked for any unaccounted space where there could be a hidden compartment. Nothing. I then decided to take everything off the shelves and check in, under and behind each item. Halfway there, I picked up one of those wheat thins, the ones that people stick pins and needles into. One of the needles pricked my finger. Tired from insomnia, suspicious, worried, and very angry, I did something I knew never to do. I lost my temper. Taking a small bag, I threw it at the opposite wall. Well, he pointed it in that direction. At the last moment, it moved in my hand and flew straight towards the bare light bulb. There was the sound of an explosion, and I found myself in the dark. Frustrated by my loss of composure, I sank into a chair illuminated only by the faint light from the doorway. The combination of the small windows on this level and the fact that it was a cloudy day meant the light was dim at best. So is my mood. I stayed in Sarah's chair, partly to calm down, partly to think about where else to look, and partly to get into Sarah's head, trying to find clues. At this rate, I'll have a heart attack before she gets back on Sunday. I spun around in my chair, spinning ideas and possibilities in my tired brain. Absorbed, I slowly became aware of a thin beam of light. In fact, it wasn't until I happened to look at my hand resting on the sewing table that his presence caught my attention. It illuminated my wedding ring. Later, the irony of this moment occurred to me. I followed the line of light to a wall made of wood panels with artificial imperfections. I remember Sarah saying that she bought it cheap when we were building the house. The word artificial meant that the wood had defects, including knots. The light came from one such small hole. It was about the size of a milk bottle cap, just above and to the right of the sewing table. I put my eye to it, but other than the realization that there was space there, I saw nothing. As an experiment, I turned off the light switch by the main door. Of course, the light from the hole also disappeared. I ran upstairs, returned with a spare light bulb, and quickly installed it. Light filled the room again. For the next 10 minutes, I pressed, probed, levered, and pulled the wall, searching for the hidden door. Once again, my efforts only resulted in extreme feelings of disappointment. I was on the verge of taking out the tools and completely destroying the wall when one of Sarah's and my favorite movies came to mind. In the film, a girl searched an ancient house, trying to find the entrance to a secret passage. She found the door trigger by sticking her finger into the small hole. My gaze went to the hole. My feet moved towards him on their own. I felt the hole with my finger and found an obstacle at 3 o'clock. It didn't move in or out or counterclockwise. But when turning clockwise, there was a distinct click, and one of the vertical wooden panels at the other end of the room opened a centimeter. My heart accelerated. One moment it was calm, and the next it was beating wildly. We built this house. The only people who could know about the secret room were the architect, the builders, and one other person, Sarah. Sarah, the only one who had the motivation to build the secret room. What was I about to discover about my unsophisticated wife? I knew instinctively that whatever was in that room was serious business. The effort alone to keep me away from the construction site while this project was being built was enough to understand this. Instead of being satisfied that I had finally found proof that I wasn't going crazy, that Sarah had indeed been keeping a secret from me, I swallowed, suppressing the sadness and disappointment to deal with later. Having sharply opened the door, I immediately saw a connection adjacent to the wall pillar. That's why I didn't feel any movement during previous attempts. The space behind the door was illuminated by a light strip above the frame. They say that keepers of secrets often indulge in the simplest things. Tonight that saying came true. It was a mistake that this light and the sewing room light were connected to the same switch. Unless the outside light bulb burns out, or in this case comes under friendly fire, the secret room will never be discovered. Oddly enough, I wondered if this was Sarah's oversight, or if the electrician didn't follow her instructions. I was aware that I was procrastinating. Knowing deep down that everything that was in the compartment would change my happy life forever, I did not want to reveal Sarah's secrets. For a long time, I was tempted to close the room and leave. Perhaps ignorance was bliss. Later, I realized that even in my wildest dreams, I could not imagine how many changes would happen in my future. The space was 24 inches deep. Opened with a 3-foot panel, there were clothes hanging on a steel rod, just like Sarah's closet upstairs. However, unlike the last one, these ones were clearly cool and much more revealing than the ones I was used to seeing on her. Downstairs stood a small chest of drawers, which, on a quick inspection, was filled with linen that, if worn by my beautiful wife, would have excited the excitement of an Egyptian mummy. Next to the dresser were racks of about 10 pairs of high heels. The right wall of the space was wooden and clearly the end. The left wall was steel. As I turned left, I noticed that there was a gap between the wall and the steel surface. In the darkness, I saw that what I had at first thought was a solid wall was in fact the left door of the double doors. There was a lock that I activated, allowing me to open the second door. The second half of the secret room was completely occupied by a huge fireproof safe. It was so large that it could only be installed before the room was completed. Where was I when all this was happening? Sarah, oh Sarah, what are you hiding? The front of the safe had a keyhole and a large handle. Crap. Now I had to look for the key. In desperation, I grabbed the handle and pushed on it, almost losing my balance when it suddenly turned. Sarah must have been confident that I would never find the secret compartment and did not lock the safe. I wasn't sure how to feel about this. Was she so confident because she thought I was a fool, or because she thought she was so smart? So, if it wasn't for security reasons, why was there a need for a huge safe? Keep mice away, or protect the contents from fire in case of a house fire. This meant that the contents were very valuable. Taking a deep breath, I opened the thick door and stepped into a completely different reality. The upper 2/3 of the space was occupied by steel shelves. The bottom third was a steel box. The first thing that caught my attention was the glossy brochure from the cruise line. The cover showed a cruise ship sailing off a spectacular ice shelf, Antarctica. Underneath this booklet were others for Alaska, the West Indies, and you guessed it, all the other places she supposedly visited with her aunt. I suspected, even early in my investigation, that these were her research materials, the source of her future stories about her fantastical, fictional cruises. One of the shelves was filled with magazines, conveniently labeled by year, and documents, some loose, others in envelopes. On the next shelf were more documents and several DVDs, all non-commercial and all in separate plastic cases. Each disc had initials and a date. The top one was labeled AC, the 4th of August 2016. This was approximately 20 months ago. There was an open wooden tray on the bottom shelf. When I pulled it out, its contents sparkled in the light. It contained jewelry. Lots of jewelry. I've never been interested in jewelry, but I know 18-karat gold when I see it. These were obviously expensive things, but strangely, they looked as if they had been thrown away accidentally, almost thrown away. The owner, whoever he was, did not treat expensive jewelry with respect. Among the sparkling glitter were 2 satin ring cases. These at least looked like they had been carefully placed. The contents of the first, larger case left me in awe. It was a single diamond, and a big one. I raised it closer to the light, and judging by the way it sparkled, as soon as it caught a little light, I took it for real. The second case broke my heart. Looking small and insignificant compared to the rest of the pile, there lay 2 rings, one with a central diamond flanked by 2 smaller diamonds, the other a simple gold ring. How insignificant the diamonds looked compared to the giant in the other case. How familiar these rings were. Of course, they were familiar. I bought them. I gave one on my knees. Another thing was when I stood in front of the priest. I fell to my knees in a painful parody of my proposal, my hands shaking like a Parkinson's patient. Wherever my wife is that is within reach by car, she is there as a single woman. The barriers protecting my thoughts from extremes collapsed under the pressure of new evidence. I'm a little ashamed to admit that I jumped to my feet only to stagger backwards and fall into my chair, feeling, well, emotional. I was only interrupted by my phone alarm reminding me of the time for the school run. I collected my thoughts, shared the shock and grief, and left. This time I picked up James and Jenny first before going to Sister Carrie's. We were invited to dinner. All the way I thought about what I found and its meaning. After dinner, while my children were playing with their cousins, I revealed the truth to my sister and her husband. They couldn't believe that Sarah could be anything other than a loving wife and caring mother, but they wanted to immediately go to my house and see what was in the envelopes, on the papers, and in the magazines. We all knew that if we knew the truth before Sarah returned, it would be from these documents. My sister wanted to come with me right away, but I dissuaded her, saying that I needed to deal with this first. As soon as it was decent, I collected the children and returned home. After putting them to bed and waiting for Cindy to fall asleep, I took the baby monitor and went downstairs again, full of anxiety and, at the same time, reluctant to start reading. Before picking up the first magazine I decided to start with them, I returned the wooden tray to the shelf. This brought my attention to the only place I had not yet explored, to the steel box below. I couldn't move it from the awkward angle. I knelt down and looked closer. There was no castle. Grabbing it tighter and at a better angle, I pulled harder. The drawer slid out. I stepped back, stunned. The reason it was so difficult to open was because its contents were very heavy. But then there is gold. 11 gold bars lay on a thick felt mat. Some were smaller 100G bars, but most were larger 250G bars. I knew a little about bullion. Right after our wedding, Sarah convinced me to buy a 100G bar as an investment. It is still in the bank safe. Her boss was convinced that gold would soon skyrocket in price. He was right. The bar we paid about $7,500 for was now worth over $14,500. It seemed like not a week went by without Sarah Googling the current price of gold and telling me how much our shiny little brick was worth. I quickly did some math in my head and estimated that there was about $133,000 in gold in the box. While I was trying to figure this out, I noticed that the layer of felt underneath the ingots was uneven. Lifting up a corner of the mat, I saw another layer of ingots. After quickly moving a few of them, I lifted up another layer of felt to find another stunning layer of gold. Was this what Howard Carter felt when he opened Tutankhamun's tomb? Another quick movement of the ingots revealed that the third layer was the last. Quickly but carefully, I returned the bars to their place in the box, arranging them according to size. I took out my phone and turned on the calculator. I won't bore you with the math, but even at the current price of about $1,800 an ounce, there was over $1.5 million worth of gold in the box. Only then did I wonder where Sarah got this gold from. My eyes, as if automatically, went to the right, to the sexy, revealing clothes hanging where I should never have seen them. A terrible thought entered my soul. As I put the bars back into the box, I desperately tried to rationalize everything I had found. Besides the obvious, of course. I'm a little confused about which documents to read first. Ultimately, I decided that the magazines promised the best chance to quickly find out what was going on, so I picked up the one labeled 2018 and opened it. I made a mistake. It wasn't a magazine. It was an accounting journal. Not only that, but it was coded. No, I quickly realized it was not a code, just shorthand. The first page began with the balance carried over from the end of last year. Strange, it was not only in dollars, but also in ounces and dollars. In the far right column was the dollar amount, $1,650,900. I realized that this was the only way to account for the changing price of gold. The first page showed that the amount of gold remained static, but cash increased by $1,500 on the last Tuesday in January. I scrolled to February. There were 3 cash top-ups of $1,500 each on Wednesdays. January was a holiday, and we spent 3 weeks traveling, only returning for a few days to prepare for the start of the school year in the first week of February. Oh no. March contained 3 editions of $1,500. In April, there were 3 top-ups that became the standard amount, and one for a whopping $20,000. It's strange that the next day there was a withdrawal for the same amount. I quickly flipped through the rest of the book, but it was empty. Inside the back cover were 3 printed of 4 sheets. A quick look at them revealed that they were listing houses or something that was for sale. There were a lot of more important things to read, so I only skimmed through them. Then I picked up last year's journal. This time I only skimmed through it, stopping when I finally saw something in the debit column. 2 things, in fact, in 1 month. The first was at $78.53 and labeled PTRL. All I could think was that it meant gasoline. Fuel for her car? How strange if this is so. The second withdrawal was marked as VS $125 Ling. I didn't know what that meant. This ledger also contained delivery receipts pasted in. It took several minutes to confirm that these were delivery receipts for gold bars. On the same page as the receipt, of course, the cash amount was decreasing and the ounces were increasing. Most months contained 3 cash top-ups, some 4. The summer months were sometimes reduced to 1 or 2. Out of interest, I scrolled to March last year. 2 replenishments of $1,500 and 1 huge one of $20,000. Next to the last one was written West Indies. You guessed it, it was a cruise destination last year. Quickly flipping through the 2016 magazine, I found a $20,000 edition next to the word Greece, that year's destination. I glanced at the pile of booklets. Sarah returned that year with colorful stories and even a few Greek words. If indeed she had never been there, then the level of her deception was astonishing and heartbreaking. Who is this woman? Did I even know her? I suppressed these thoughts. I wanted to be as clear as possible. I put last year's magazine back in its place, and instead of going through them all, I took the earliest one. It was labeled 2003, the year before we met. A quick glance showed that there were many more entries, but usually for smaller amounts. The first one was for $200, but within the first 3 pages, it went up to $600. Each loan had a signature next to it. I think there were about 4 or 5 different signatures. Flipping through the rest of the book, I found 3 large amounts, all for $10,000. All this really confused me, so I moved from them to envelopes. The first one was a regular business size. The envelope may have been standard, but its contents only made things weirder. There were registration papers for the Ferrari. The owner was Sarah, and the car was registered just under 2 years ago. Sarah owned a car that was probably worth at least $500,000. Where the hell was she? A random passage came to mind, inappropriate in the current situation. I think it was last year. I was running an errand for work when I stopped at a traffic light next to a shiny red Ferrari convertible. I looked at the car to admire it. The driver was blonde, wearing sunglasses and a scarf. She looked about my age, but I didn't take a closer look. I was interested in the car. Sitting next to her, his hand on her bare leg, was a much older man who seemed vaguely familiar to me. The words "Daddy" came to mind. I was admiring the long, elegant front of the car when, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the driver turn towards me. I turned to smile at her, but she quickly looked away. Perhaps her daddy was jealous. Again, in my peripheral vision, I saw that the light had turned green. I expected the Ferrari to rush forward, but it stayed in the background until it turned 2 blocks later. Could it have been Sarah driving? We definitely didn't have a multi-$100,000 car in our yard. I'm observant and would almost certainly have noticed. So where did she keep it? What a fast life she had. Owning one of the greatest cars in the world and not being able to drive it every time you want. Perhaps only once a week on Wednesdays. But how to avoid recognition by people you know? Perhaps wearing a wig, a scarf, and huge glasses. The next envelope was large and thick. It contained cash. Lots of cash. This didn't interest me at all. It's strange that under the envelope there was a booklet about apartments. I knew this place. The first stage of the complex was inaugurated a couple of months ago. Sarah and I discussed it. Apartments with a view of the river were not sold out like hot cakes due to the price. Not much less than 750,000. One of the things I liked, oh my gosh, I have to give her the benefit of the doubt at this stage. Unlike lawyers whose credo is, every man is innocent until proven guilty, I firmly believe in the old maxim, every man or woman is innocent until proven guilty. Where am I staying? I liked that Sarah did not aspire to social advancement. She was quite happy with my salary in the low six figures. We could afford one of these apartments over time if it worked. However, this would mean that she would give up her primary role as a housewife. None of us were ready for this, so I could understand Sarah having the booklet, but why was it hidden here? When I returned to the closet, away from the best light in the sewing room, I noticed a folded piece of paper on the floor. It was a blank title deed for an address in an apartment complex. Sarah's maiden name was written in ink in the space provided. At the bottom where the stamp would have been was a rough sketch of the stamp. Whoever drew it clearly had no artistic ability. Next to it was written in the same illegible handwriting as her name. You know what you have to do to get the real one. Maybe Sarah knew. I was, however, puzzled. The next, much thinner envelope contained a simple appraisal report for what was supposed to be a large diamond ring. It was evaluated by a company in a nearby major city. I picked up the large case and looked inside again. Heck, this is what $132,000 or a 5-carat diamond looks like. I already assumed that this was a real piece when I first saw it, but the realization that it could be worth so much shocked me. I returned the ring and papers to their place. As a final thought, I looked at the score again. July 2014. Jenny was only a few months old at the time. Was there any meaning to this? None that I could remember. After moving the stack of desk calendars on the back shelf, I found 2 boxes of morning after pills. The calendars themselves were labeled with the Sarah cycle. In my haste to look at the rest, I didn't think long about their meaning. The remaining documents consisted of envelopes marked with years, which, when examined, contained receipts. I glanced at one. Victoria's Secret, set of bra, panties, and garter belt for pregnant women. We had a similar pile of receipts upstairs. Sarah kept them all in case she needed to return something. All that was left were DVDs. Subconsciously, I knew that they would be Sarah's last chance at innocence. There were 6 of them, 3 with different initials and dated shortly after our engagement. The other 3 were labeled AC. One was dated 3 months before our wedding, the second 7 years later. The last one, as already mentioned, was just under 2 years ago. I looked at DVDs and my watch. Decision time. I was already exhausted after one sleepless night and suspected that the video would contain something that would deprive me of many others, at least for the next year or two. I had the responsibilities of caring for 3 children. So, after texting my sister asking if I could babysit Cindy the next day, I went to bed. If Sarah's only crime was to deprive me of this time with my family, then she has already committed a big crime. The details of me dropping off the older kids at their schools and picking up Cindy are not important. Suffice it to say that at 5 minutes past 8 on Thursday morning, I was in the living room loading the first DVD into our player. Walking back into the family room, case in hand, heart already racing, I read the label again, SJ September 20th, 2005. I proposed to Sarah in September of that year. Was it significant? I did not know. Further thoughts were interrupted when Sarah's voice came from the TV. I turned and fell onto the couch, my worst fears confirmed not by the images I saw, but by the words she exchanged with SJ. So, you want me to play the role of your wife and let the man you found seduce me? Yes, that's exactly it in short, but you already know that. I know, but play with me, Steve. Your conversations help me get into character. It excites me. I groaned. It's bad enough that she was going to sleep with another man, but for him to be a weakling who likes to watch his wife sleep with other men. Steve inhaled loudly. Fine. I brought you one of Josie's dresses along with her underwear. As you know, you have almost the same hair color, but you will need to put your hair in a clip. Josie always wears her hair up during the day. They continued to discuss nicknames and terms of endearment that Steve, as I now knew him, and Josie used. Steve handed Sarah the bag, which she emptied onto the bed. She began to undress without the slightest embarrassment or awkwardness. Her ease confirmed what one of her notebooks had already told me. Even if I didn't want to admit it, she was already naked with him. This truth fueled the growing knot of treacherous anger in my stomach. She put on dainty panties. They were white and looked innocent. The matching bra was the same. The dress was also white and in a style that Sarah once described to me as a sundress. Strappy sandals completed the ensemble. Sarah walked over to the mirror, gathering and twisting her hair into a messy knot secured with a clip. "This is fine?" she asked. "Yes, perfect. You could be her twin. Is that why you love me, Steve? Because I look like your sweet, innocent wife?" Steve nodded. "But maybe a more mischievous version. The one who will do what she doesn't do. Right?" "Yes," he whispered in a hoarse voice. "Are you excited by the thought of seeing her having sex with another man?" Steve nodded again. I frowned. What a weak-willed idiot. Yes, I want to." I looked at the screen, shaking my head. It was Sarah, and yet not her. Her mannerisms, the way she carried herself, her choice of words, even her gestures, this was not the Sarah I had known and loved for many years. Hearing Steve apologize, I took the opportunity to survey the situation. It looked like a hotel room with a small kitchenette. Behind Sarah, in the corner of the room, there was a small table set as if for dinner. The man clearly tried to create an environment reminiscent of his home. Sarah, speaking directly to the camera, interrupted my inspection of the room. "Are you listening to this, Josie? He wants you to have sex with other men. Many other men. This isn't the first time he's asked me to act out this scenario. Hell, this isn't even the 10th time. He really likes this scene. She excites him like no other. Can you hear me? He wants you to be his bitch. He wants to give you away to strangers, to his boss, to clients, to your neighbors. He's just too afraid to ask you. That's why he's been coming to me for almost 2 years. He makes me shower beforehand using the same soap and shampoo as you. He makes me wear your clothes, your perfume, even your worn panties. And then he makes me pretend to be you and service some guy or guys he finds. Look and see what he really wants from and for you." Sarah's speech shook me to the core. I was ready to see her have sex with another man, but this... Suddenly, the purpose of the video became clear. It was not a memorable moment or a tool for self-gratification. It was a tool, yes, but not for pleasure, but for financial gain. I hit the pause button and ran to her sewing room, grabbing a magazine from 2005. For every month up to and including September, a deposit was made with the initials SJ. Nothing for the rest of the year. No large unexplained deposits either. I checked 2006, and it seemed like SJ had disappeared. If she blackmailed Steve, where's the trail? She recorded every other deposit and withdrawal, so why should she handle blackmail any differently? Still pondering this mystery, I went upstairs and prepared for the performance. The man Steve found for Josie was large, at least 6, 2 or 3, and heavily muscular. I watched, feeling a little sick, as the three of them acted out a scene in which Steve brings an old college friend home for dinner. It was like watching an adult movie with a subtle plot from the 80s, which in some ways, except for the era, it was. "I'll go change clothes and wash up. Why don't you two get to know each other better while I'm gone?" "Don't worry, honey, I'll entertain Jimmy," Josie assured Steve. Steve left the screen. "Let me refresh your drink." Josie stood up and walked around to Jimmy, leaning over him and brushing her chest against his bicep as she filled his glass of wine. She placed the bottle on the table before beginning to massage his shoulders and arms. "You're so big and strong, Jimmy. Is it from playing ball?" They exchanged some more hints, followed by showing off Josie's breasts and legs, and then Steve joined them again. "Get up, Jimmy." Now look at this, Josie, Steve said, pointing at Jimmy. You did it. I didn't, dear. I swear I didn't do anything wrong. Thoughts about you doing their job, he got excited, baby. The sight of your beautiful breasts turned him on. You have to let him find relief in you. Josie shook her head, letting out a small sob. No, honey, please don't force me. We shouldn't. It is not right. I can't. I want only you. I love you. I don't want anyone else. I gasped when I heard her say she loved him. For a moment, I forgot that she was pretending to be his wife. I know you don't need him, Steve interrupted. That's what makes this so special to me, baby. It's that you do this just for me because you love me. It turns you on. So be my good little bitch and serve my friend. Do you really want me to have sex with him? Do you want this? Yes, baby, that's what I want. Steve turned to Jimmy. Take off your clothes. Steve stepped towards her, kissing her forehead tenderly before following her. I heard him unzip her dress, loosening the thin straps on her arms. Well, then you guessed what happened. When they finished, without saying a word, he stood up, took his clothes and left, his only recognition being a quick nod to Steve. My beautiful bitch, you were perfect. Before I heard the hotel door click, Steve was on top of Josie, and they started having sex. There was no movement on the screen, and the only sound was that of two people recovering from troubled sex. I sat on the floor with my back to the living room, stunned. For most of the video, I couldn't see the woman on screen as Sarah. She was so convincing as Steve's wife, Josie. It was Sarah, my Sarah, who was not mine after all. I stood up, contemplating the movie, when suddenly he saw Sarah speaking directly to the camera, now fully clothed. Hey, Steve, I thought I'd give you a little souvenir of our last time together. I'm sure you'll agree with me, it was unforgettable. Yes, you heard me correctly. This little video will never see the light of day as long as you are a good boy and never contact me again. If you see me in public, you won't. If someone introduces us, you'll act like it's the first time, and you'll never, and I mean never, tell anyone about me or talk about our time if I catch even the slightest hint of you. Have I ever told anyone anything about me? Your sweet little Josie is going to get a copy of the video, and we wouldn't want that, would we, Stevie? In that brief moment after her words, before the screen went dark, Sarah smiled knowingly. It was an unpleasant smile, and certainly not the happy and loving smile I was used to seeing on her face. I felt sick and depressed, below the belly of a mosquito. I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to eat again, but at least the mystery of why was answered. The video was not blackmail, it was insurance. I looked at the remaining video boxes lying on the entertainment unit, unsure if I could handle 5 more like the one I had just watched. I knew that if I didn't get through them today, I would never get through this again. Band-Aid, Mike, I said out loud, as if saying the word would somehow give me more resolve than just thinking it. Tear it off quickly and with one blow. It will hurt less in the long run. Sighing at the wisdom of my own logic, I walked toward the DVD player as if walking through mud. I deleted SJ's video and replaced it with RG October 18th, 2005. When I pressed play, I decided that I didn't need to watch every moment. I just needed to know the story as a whole. Next was HD October 25th, 2005. Sarah was clearly busy in October. HD, or Harold as Sarah called him, was another pervert. Each video ended with Sarah's now familiar warning. It was clear, at least to me, that in preparation for our upcoming wedding, she was distancing herself from her past. I paused before inserting the first act video, the one in June 2006. According to Sarah's books, Alaska was a regular customer. Why? What made him different from others? Why 3 videos? Did she really love him? Do you love him, maybe? I knew the only way to get answers to my questions was to embed the first of his videos, but I still hesitated. They can't be worse than those you've already seen, I told myself. Let's get this over with and get this over with. Act stood for Artie. He looked familiar. I stopped the film at the first scene, a close-up of Artie's face studying him. Where have I seen him before? The answer eluded me until I pressed play and Artie turned around. His profile gave him away. It was a guy in a Ferrari driven by a blonde. The blonde, who appeared to be Sarah, was wearing a wig. The first video confirmed the correctness of my theory about the degree of pain. Almost sexually, everything was more modest, but I recognized the master bedroom of our first house. Sarah, damn her traitorous heart, slept with him in our bed. How could she? How could she bring him to our house? I went to the bathroom and splashed some cold water on my face. I was procrastinating, and I knew it. Unable to hesitate any longer, I returned to the living room. DVD-2 called. I couldn't help but notice the date, August 2013. Sarah was in her first trimester with Jenny. How could she have sex with some skinny old man when she was having children with me? And why is there such a long break between films? So many questions, so few answers. Shaking my head in frustration, I pressed play and prepared myself for my wife's next act of betrayal. What kind of perversion will she commit this time? It was as painful as I expected. Tired and frustrated, I went into the third and final act movie, expecting to see more of the same. I knew from the date that it was another photo taken while Sarah was pregnant. This time with Cindy, final stage. This meant that we were in this house. I said a silent prayer that she would not stain our marriage bed. My prayers were answered. Sort of. She didn't have it in our bed, but in what was then the guest room and was now Cindy's room. Unlike all previous films, Sarah did not speak directly to the camera, threatening exposure. Why? As with many things I discovered, I had even more questions than when I first started. When I returned all 6 horror films to the secret closet, certainty crystallized in my shocked head. I married an alien. Without all the evidence I now had, never in a million years would I have believed that my wife was capable of what the movie showed. In a state of trance, I went to pick up the children. My sister invited us to dinner again. While the children were playing, I told them in an abbreviated whisper everything I now knew. It was not a pretty picture. Of course, I watched the films and didn't study the books properly, but there was really only one conclusion. I married a very smart and very talented actress who was an easy girl when I met her. She started by taking a modest amount. Without knowing the duration of her sessions, it was impossible to accurately judge how modest they were. She gradually increased her fees to what she felt she was worth. I could only imagine that paying for sex is like buying art. It all depends on how much one is willing to pay. Sarah has the same look. Picture Kate Beckinsale, and you'll get a clear idea and her willingness to pander to their whims. And I think you could say that men were willing to pay her a pretty penny for her services. After we met and I, for one, fell madly in love, she gradually abandoned her clients. Clients who I suspected were members of the city's elite. They had to be like that to be able to pay for someone like Sarah, a beautiful, reserved woman who indulges their every whim. Threw them all out. Unfortunately, no. Whoever Ack was, he survived the culling. Judging by the gifts, he probably bought it for her, most likely because he was very generous. If she sells the Ferrari, the diamond ring, and the bullion, she will have a good life. My sister asked a question that I had been avoiding. What was I going to do with all this? Divorce due to blatant dishonesty and being a bitch in the closet was my knee-jerk reaction. The rage at Sarah's betrayal, at her long and ongoing betrayal, crowded out other emotions. They will probably appear later. In a way, I didn't want the intensity of my anger to diminish. Feeling furious was better than feeling heartbroken. Reflecting on modern sister divorce laws has led to a grim conclusion. Sarah will likely keep her secret stash and have a huge nest egg in reserve. During this time, she will live in my house, have custody of my children, and live on my child's support, while probably continuing to have an old sugar daddy. The possibility of being separated from my children was too terrible to consider. I needed to figure out a way to avoid this. This became the only immutable point of my plan. If that meant continuing to live with the bitch, then so be it. It was Curry who brought me back to reality. I assumed I would have a say in my future. What if this is not the case? What was Sarah's plan? With her assets and undoubtedly her contacts, Will I have any right to my future? What was Sarah's plan? Was I part of her future in a good way? Or, as I suspected, was Sarah both loving and evil? Did my future depend on which one was dominant? Again, my sister questioned my assumptions. What if it was Sarah who had no resources? In modern society, wasn't it the case that luck favored those who had luck? After all, hasn't it always been like this? In the 21st century, the golden rule is still the same. Whoever has the gold rules. So, after dinner, I accepted my sister's kind offer to spend the night with her and the children, to free me for what I had to do, and to help me study the notebooks more carefully. After the kids fell asleep, we discussed what I was thinking about in the car along the way. Do I need to call her aunt in England to confirm that Sarah never spent a week a year with her? In the end, we decided no. If my guess is correct, then Sarah called her aunt between the end of her cruise and her return home. Sarah stocked up on photographs and compelling stories before returning home. Regardless of whether her aunt was aware of her game, it didn't matter. Sarah would have been warned that she was in for a confrontation, and I wanted her to be caught off guard. I wanted her to be as confused as I was when I discovered her secret. With this decision, my sister began to read. Target, make a reasonable guess about whether I am included in Sarah's plans for the future. 2 hours later, the sister reached 2008, and the safe was empty of gold, jewelry including Sarah's rings, the Ferrari title, and cash. They were in waterproof camping boxes, buried under the compost pile. I'll test in daylight to make sure my camouflage efforts were convincing. Now I was the one with the resources. Hopefully, if things go to extremes, they will compensate Sarah's benefits legally. If it comes to that, my plans were still fluid. I joined my sister, and between us, we finished scanning the notebooks. Conclusion. My reading of the situation was confirmed. Sarah had many clients before we got engaged, and only one after our wedding. Early records allowed us to match some customer initials to the videos. From her little speeches at the end of every video, except the last one with Ak, we knew that Sarah was expecting trouble cutting off communication with some clients. It is very clever indeed to record the session with the purpose of blackmailing them so that they will leave peacefully and not try to approach her if they see her with her happy family. I didn't recognize any of the places on the first 3 discs. She may not have wanted to reveal where she lived to these clients. On the other hand, all 3-act films were shot in our house. Sarah was smart. I couldn't imagine her regularly meeting him there. There's too much chance that the neighbors will notice and tell me, or I'll come home unexpectedly. There was evidence from the 3rd-act movie that the guy took pleasure in humiliating me. I could imagine the pressure he put on Sarah to have sessions in my bed. How often has she succumbed to this pressure? We could only assume that Ak knew where she lived, so there was no point in hiding it. Moreover, it is much easier to install a blackmail camera in your home. Keeping only one client, probably due to his generosity, since there was no indication in the last video that she loved him, and if the last video was any indication, perhaps she was disgusted by him. Sarah's secret life continued until now. The length of her deception and betrayal was staggering. It has evolved to charging $1,500 per session every Wednesday. Well, every Wednesday, except for some school and family holidays. Or, presumably, when the lover was away or Sarah was on her period. The latter would explain why most months had only 3 sessions. Once a year, we assumed, she would fake a trip to see her aunt and either stay at his house or actually travel somewhere with him. Anyway, it cost him $20,000. The notebooks honestly recorded his payments. Special notes pointed to dates when he gave her a large cash bonus of $100K a month after James was born and a large ring immediately after Jenny's birth. Then the Ferrari when she was pregnant with Cindy. The evaluations of all gifts were carefully recorded. They showed cash withdrawals to buy underwear. Suddenly, the abbreviated notes I saw opposite one withdrawal made sense. VS stood for Victoria's Secret and Ling was short for lingerie. Whether Sarah invested in sexy lingerie to keep her lover's interest or just for herself was impossible to tell. After all, they had been sleeping for over 10 years. During this period, you need to think about ways to keep sex vibrant. A few pages later, there were checks as Sarah converted the cash into gold. Small amounts, below the limit that would be of interest to someone looking for evidence of organized crime. I would have found her skill at planning impressive if it had not been overshadowed by her ability to deceive. There were only a few entries that we couldn't explain. The biggest one was just last month. It was a $20,000 debit that almost immediately followed Axe $20K payment and simply had the initials HM in the comments. Did she buy anything? Was she blackmailed? Nothing in the documents or notebooks explained this debit. Strange. As I was trying to wrap my head around this, I noticed Curry looking at the pictures of the children on the wall in the family room, then glanced at me. When I asked, she brought up a question that I had already thought about once after watching the first act video, namely, the paternity of my children. She even went to the cupboard and pulled out an old family album with pictures of us as children and spent 10 minutes comparing coloring, facial features, and other features to us at a similar age. And I was glad that she saw the same family resemblance that I did. This was reassuring because I knew I couldn't trust that I was only seeing what I wanted to see. Suddenly, the importance of morning after pills and tracking Sarah's cycle dawned on me. God bless. Sarah seemed to be doing the right thing for our family, at least in this one aspect. Still, accidents happen. I decided to order DNA and STD testing. With our research on pause, we decided to wait for Sarah to return and confront her. What else could we do? It was Sunday evening, and Sarah wasn't due back until Sunday evening. I was already planning to take Monday off. The sister agreed to look after the children on Sunday and take them to school on Monday. The rest was in the hands of the gods. Before I went to bed, I showed Curry a few clips from one of the act videos. The sister also thought the guy looked familiar, but couldn't remember who he was. What I did the rest of the week is now shrouded in fog. Thank God for the children and their regime. Thank God for their needs and constant questions. They were my anchor. Loving them made it difficult to maintain my anger because as much as my children were a part of me, they were also a part of Sarah. I missed my anger. Anger made things easier to bear. I was distracted and increasingly nervous, but determined about Sunday. An expected call on Saturday from Sarah to say she was back in coverage never came. After I dropped off the kids on Sunday, I sat and mentally prepared myself for the upcoming confrontation. The details of my backup plan became irrelevant. Sarah didn't show up. She didn't show up on Monday either. Not a word. Now, in addition to strong irritation, another emotion has been added: anxiety. With no news and no better idea, I filed a missing person report Monday afternoon. I stuck to Sarah's stated facts without saying a word about what I knew about her other life. It was clear from their reaction that they thought she was just another runaway wife. I was literally told, "Don't call us, we will call you." I tried to hide my anxiety from the children. He was simply making non-binding statements that she was delayed. I took the rest of the week off. On Wednesday, I was pulled out of my thoughts by the screeching of brakes in my driveway. I looked out the window and saw my sister running towards the front door waving a newspaper. She calmed down enough to show me page 5. The headline read, "Local Recovery Millionaire Opens New Shelter for Violence Victims." The main content of the article was that he donated funds to the orphanage, but this information barely penetrated my brain. I couldn't see beyond the photographs. Arthur Kindred, AC. He looked pretty much the same as he did in the most recent video of Sarah, minus the clothes, of course. His wife stood next to him with a sullen expression on her face. At first glance, she seemed much younger than her husband, even with a sour expression on her face. She embodied the stereotype of a bored rich wife, well-groomed and made up to the utmost. On closer inspection, the age difference didn't seem that big. She simply slowed down the aging process with a scalpel and maybe a few injections. She was a beauty, at least in her youth. Now she looked like a withered rose trying to regain the first color of youth. Arthur Kindred was rich. I mean, really loaded. He was also known to hate publicity unless it benefited him. Unsurprisingly, he looked familiar, but was not at the forefront of my thoughts. This also explained Ferrari. Anything less than $1 million was a small change for this guy. He never showed up even when he donated his Gulfstream G550 for joyful flights at the fair every year. Excitement ran through me. Now I have a name. Now I could get the address. And then reality hit me. Of course, I now had a name, but the name left me in a dilemma. This person could be a key source of information about my wife's whereabouts. The only problem was that I couldn't act on this information without telling the police a lot more than I wanted to. If Sarah were a victim of violence, I would automatically be if I revealed what I knew about her lover. In the end, I decided that the only option was to check everything myself. After saying goodbye to my sister and packing Cindy into the car, I drove to Arthur Kindred's house. Kindred's house turned out to be a mansion the size of a small state, protected by closed gates. I parked across the road, wondering if I could see anything over the fence. No, while I was contemplating my next move, a silver Lexus stopped at the opening gate. Mrs. Kindred got out of the car to check her mailbox. I recognized her by her well-groomed, skillfully dyed blonde hair. Cindy, sitting in the back seat, clearly said, "Aunt Jean." Once again, I was overcome with blind rage. This scoundrel's wife knew my daughter. My bitch wife must have brought Cindy here. How deep does Sarah's betrayal go? To what extent were these people sick? Was anything too low for them? I started the engine, crossed the road, and stopped behind the Lexus. Mrs. Kindred turned pale, but stood still. I threw the door open and screamed before it opened completely. "Can you explain how my little girl knows who you are?" I watched as she turned towards my car. Cindy, in her innocence, waved her hand. I watched as the last of the color left Mrs. Kindred's face as she stuttered a response. "This has nothing to do with me. You need to ask my husband." She turned and walked back to the driver's side of her car. "He is here?" I shouted. "No, he left in the morning. He'll be back this weekend. Now leave or I'll call the police." With these words, and with a strange expression on her face, she drove through the gate, which closed behind her. Her facial expression puzzled me. What was it? Just discomfort, panic, anger, irritation? None of these words fit. Jean Kindred knew more than she said about Sarah's whereabouts. Of this I was sure, but unable to confront her or her husband in a place where they could not avoid me, and having no better plan, I drove home. Cindy confirmed that she had been to the big house many times. I hoped she wasn't visiting her father there. I stopped and bought DNA test kits. The kids might be like me and Curry, but I needed something specific, something solid that I could believe in, because with every new discovery I realized that almost nothing in my life was the same. I thought, to shorten a long story, I didn't return to the mansion over the weekend. It was all over the news that night. The private jet of Arthur Kindred, a local philanthropist and good guy, crashed in a neighboring state. There were no survivors. How could everything be so terrible? When will I get lucky? How will I now find out what happened to Sarah? My only hope is to find Jean Kindred. 2 bodies were recovered from the wreckage. Both are male. It was amazing. I half expected to hear that one of them was female. Relief, anger, fear, and disappointment all intertwined in my stomach. It's terrible when you want your wife to be alive and well and dead at the same time. According to preliminary data about the victims of the disaster, the bodies belonged to Arthur Kindred and his pilot. The plane was heading to Brisbane to refuel and then to Mexico, where Mr. Kindred had businesses. No one was more surprised than me when a silver Lexus pulled into my driveway on Saturday morning. Why did Arthur Kindred's widow decide to visit me now when she had previously avoided me as best she could? I watched her approach and, without turning my head, asked my sister to take the children to play in the backyard. Carrie didn't even ask why. She simply gathered the children and took them out the back door. The sound of the door closing coincided with the doorbell ringing. With every step towards the door, new possibilities arose in my mind. She came to tell me where Sarah was, that Sarah had met her maker. Maybe she wanted to know how much I knew. By my silence, I wasn't sure how I felt about any of these options. "Mrs. Kindred, to what do I owe this honor?" Mike, I'm sorry to be so forward, but I never knew Sarah's married last name. Do you mind if I come in? I have a few questions I'd like to discuss with you. My response was to step aside to allow her to pass. She did so, her heels clicking on the polished floorboards. She stopped where the corridor opened, waiting for me to show her the direction. I gestured to the left, into the living room. Make yourself at home. May I offer you something to drink? A glass of water, please. I poured myself one while I was in the kitchen. After handing her the glass, I sat down opposite her. She took a sip, carefully placed the glass on the coffee table, and straightened up. Taking a deep breath, she met my gaze. Her gaze was determined and with something else that I couldn't identify. You're probably wondering why I'm here. You said you had some issues you wanted to discuss. She smiled awkwardly. This is true. I waited, holding her gaze. She cleared her throat, then laughed nervously. If you had told me as a newlywed that one day I would be sitting in someone's living room having the conversation I'm about to have with you, I would have called you crazy. I smiled. It didn't reach her eyes, but I decided that showing friendliness might help her get to the point. May I assume from your visit last week that you are aware of Arthur's relationship with your wife? I nodded, not wanting to reveal the extent of my knowledge. I was more interested in how deeply she knew. Did you kill my husband? The rudeness of the question shocked me, and my mouth fell open. I quickly recovered, and my answer was harsh with anger. Listen, lady, your husband died in a plane crash. Yes and no. I raised an eyebrow, determined to control my reactions. Yes, the plane crashed, but not due to mechanical failure or pilot error. They found traces of explosives. Don't ask me how I know that. It's, unofficial. He was killed. This time I kept my reactions under control. It was complicated. Murder. I felt my life spinning out of control. Panic fought with indignation. Indignation won. And what does this have to do with me? Well, you could say that the discovery that your wife had a long-term sexual relationship with my husband could be a motive for murder. The same could be said about you. Crime of passion and all that. Add to that the fact that you are on the verge of an inheritance, and I would say that you are probably suspect number one. It seems to me that the purpose of your visit and your question is to distract me from these thoughts, to stop me from going to the police with such a theory. She pursed her lips. I've known about Arthur and Sarah for years. Why would I kill him now? Maybe you finally had enough of it. Maybe they did something that was the last straw. Maybe you found out he was going to divorce you. Maybe you were biding your time. Maybe you decided that you suddenly have a scapegoat. I don't know. Jean Kindred snorted rather unladylike, but underneath her bravado I noticed a slight worry. It's all nonsense. As I said, young man, I've known about them for years, while you, I assume, only recently found out about them, and my guess is that they are. The police may find it quiet. It's interesting that Arthur died within 24 hours of you showing up at my house looking for him. They might also be interested to know that you approved of your husband paying an easy-to-get girl for kinky sex, and that his mistress is now missing too. Don't be so naive. Many wealthy men keep a mistress, and their wives turn a blind eye to it. I looked at her with contempt. Sorry, forgot. You're rich. Normal rules don't apply to you. She had the decency to wince. Is that why you killed him? Last time, I didn't kill your husband, did you? She sighed impatiently, but again a note was struck that did not match. As I've already made quite clear, I had no reason. I've known about both of them for a long time. And why would I come here accusing you of killing Arthur if I was guilty? I noticed that she didn't give a simple no. Well, there's an old saying that the best defense is a good offense. This won't get you anywhere, Mike. Well, I'm not going to admit to a crime I didn't commit just for your convenience. What do you know? Why should I tell you? She sighed heavily again. It seemed to me that she was a woman accustomed to submission, and I did not follow her orders. I needed information from her without revealing what I already knew. How? How to do it. Okay, Mrs. Kindred, tell me what you know about my wife and your husband, and I'll tell you if I already knew about it. She looked at me, appraising me. Finally, she sighed and nodded. Deal. I was surprised that she agreed, but I didn't argue. She took a sip of water and cleared her throat. Sarah had a financial crisis in college. To cope with it, she turned to sex for money. She once told me that she liked it. She said it made her feel confident and sexy. She also liked money. Arthur started using Sarah's services in 2003. She waited with a raised eyebrow. The college financial crisis was news to me, but I nodded anyway. I know. Sarah tried to end their arrangement in 2006, but Arthur convinced her to continue. I know. I wasn't sure about this, but it made sense given the date of the first video. The second video was filmed while Sarah Jenny was pregnant, so perhaps Sarah was again considering ending their relationship after the birth since we already had 2 children planned. Apparently something changed her mind after making the second video because we had Cindy, and she even talked about wanting to have a 4th child. I didn't say anything about my thoughts out loud. Kindred didn't need to know that. Arthur couldn't have children, so he was obsessed with it. Over time, he started encouraging Sarah to get pregnant. He rewarded her with a significant amount of money when she gave birth to Jamie. I winced when I heard she knew Jamie's name, but I nodded. I couldn't resist asking the obvious question. If Arthur was so obsessed with becoming a father, why didn't you try IVF or adopt a child when you found out he couldn't have children? Arthur was a proud and vain man. He denied that our inability to have children was due to him. Kindred turned away, clearly in discomfort, but after straightening up, she continued, and by that time, some of his perversions had become known to me, and I wasn't sure if I could stay married to him, so I went along with his denial. To be honest, if it weren't for Sarah, I probably would have left him. Thank you. I couldn't keep the sarcasm out of my voice. I'm glad my wife helped you maintain your lifestyle. Kindred winced. I watched the blush rise up her neck. Her look of shame filled me with a brief but fierce joy. Well, moving on, Arthur encouraged Sarah to get pregnant again, and when she gave birth to Jenny, he gave her a diamond ring. I was prepared for her to know about Jenny and managed to restrain my natural urge to flinch. At the same time, I almost admired Sarah's maneuvers. She tricked Arthur into getting a huge diamond ring for something she was going to do anyway. I nodded and Kindred continued. I suppose you were against having more children, but I think Sarah, like Arthur, may be convincing because you went along with it and had Cindy. Rage boiled in my stomach, its bitterness burning my throat. Yeah, she might be, and let me guess, Arthur awarded her a Ferrari. Now it was Mrs. Kindred's turn to nod. I fought the urge to break something. My rage at realizing that I now had 3 beautiful children because a dirty old man had paid my wife to do it was almost unbearable. Children should be conceived out of love, not out of greed. I know Arthur has offered to buy her an apartment if she can convince you to let her have another child. I turned away to hide my anger. I know. Then you know everything. Not really. I don't know why you're so, tolerant. Mr. Mike, I didn't like it. Honestly, I was humiliated, but it freed me from the burden of meeting Arthur's specific needs, and so I put up with it. So you sold yourself for a comfortable and privileged life. Her chin lifted, and she looked at me challengingly, but she didn't protest. I thought about it. Why didn't she defend herself? So, Mike, it looks like we're at an impasse. I think you killed Arthur. You think I did it. We both had a motive. Either way, the investigation is bad for both of us, as is publicity. Think about your children. Wow, you really are a grieving widow, aren't you? Arthur killed any love I ever had for him years ago, but that doesn't mean I killed him. It also doesn't mean I shouldn't get what's due to me after he dies. I nodded. In a way, I couldn't fault her logic. Perhaps she truly deserved her inheritance 100-fold. I'll tell you where I am, Jean. Can I call you Jean? Jean nodded. Jean, I will keep my mouth shut in front of the press under two conditions. One, you do not mention me to the police to divert attention from yourself. If you are as innocent as you claim, you can easily clear your name. Come to think of it, even if you are guilty of murder, and I think you are, you have the means to escape punishment. And secondly, if you tell me that you know about Sarah's disappearance. After another long, hard look, Jean began. Arthur took Sarah to Mexico on the Lyra. He returned alone. When I asked him where Sarah was, he said he left her there in a bad place for a week. What? I exclaimed, jumping to my feet. It's true. He said he did it because she was trying to end their relationship by blackmailing him with some incriminating videos. Besides, he had long wanted her to tell you everything, and finally to pressure her into giving birth to another child. He laughed, saying he was killing two birds with one stone. He was on his way to Mexico to pick her up when his plane was shot down. What? Involve me? Why, obviously, he didn't know me well. What would stop me from going to the press and exposing him? This answered the question of why Sarah had a photo of us in the guest room. I could easily imagine Arthur Kindred pressuring Sarah to have sex in our marital bed, and since this was our dream home, she probably resisted, and they reached a compromise in the form of a photo of me or us in full view in the guest room. Why, I think. He always said that after the first 50 million or so, money becomes meaningless. From then on, it's all about power. What's more powerful than using your influence to screw a guy's wife away? Him in front of him, knowing that he was powerless to do anything. An added bonus was that he could enjoy Sarah whenever he wanted, without having to hide. As for how to ensure your silence, he thought of offering you $1 million. We'll buy your silence and consent to a fourth child. Just as most men are motivated by money, he thought it would motivate me too. Yes, he believed that everyone has their price. I see, my wife was, I muttered angrily, and then frowned, unhappy that I had opened my anger to someone like Jean Kindred. I cleared my throat, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. So why go to such extreme measures when she was trying to finish? With his wealth, why not just offer Sarah more money or toys, or find another woman? Jean turned away, clearly weighing her answer. I knew she had made up her mind when she sighed, looking resigned. As much as it's hard for me to admit it, he loved her in some twisted way. I'm sure you don't need to list all of Arthur's perversions, but did you know that he even deluded himself that the children were really his? I collapsed into a chair. It was too much. I don't know what I expected, but it certainly wasn't this. It was too incredible, too unrealistic. A place for sex, Mexico. It was cliché, like something out of a movie. Oh, don't look at me like that. They were ordered not to touch it, or allow anyone to touch it. She was there to get a glimpse of what awaited her if she didn't comply. My husband could be quite ruthless at times. Remember our agreement, Mike. No press. All I could do was nod. Words failed me. Okay, I'll leave on my own. With every thumping step Jean Kindred took as she walked away, I winced. They were like nails in the coffin. My coffin. Before her visit, I was hurt, confused, angry, disappointed, and upset. Now I was in purgatory. Jean Kindred confirmed all my suspicions, confirmed my worst fears. When the door closed, I lowered my head. My fate was sealed. I can never forget Sarah's deception, her long list of lies. Never again will I be able to live in blissful ignorance of her constant betrayal. Never again will I be able to believe that she loves me unconditionally. Never again will I be able to tell myself that she is mine, just as I was hers from the first kiss. Never again can I be sure that she is for me, that she is my support. Always, from this day forward, I will have doubts. I'll have questions for the rest of my life. Every moment together, every conversation, every whispered word of love, every promise. How much of this was real? How much of this did Sarah play a role in? I will never know, and it breaks my heart just as much as her betrayal. Hearing my children's carefree laughter made me look up. No matter how I felt, they needed me. I had to stay strong for them. My grief had to wait. I stretched my neck from side to side to ease the tension, trying to concentrate. Why did Jean Kindred feel the need to talk to me? If she really thought I was guilty of murder, she risked me tying up loose ends, so to speak. And if, as I suspected, she had orchestrated her husband's murder, she risked being seen visiting the man who had reported his wife missing. Wives with connections to her dead husband. Did I interrupt her perfect murder with my surprise visit last week? Was she really that worried about bad press? Did she have more to hide than just murder? And Sarah, what should I do with her now? How could I get her out of Mexico when I didn't even know where Arthur Kindred left her? And even if I managed to return her to Australia, what should we do next? An insidious thought crept into my exhausted head. I tried to fight it, but its tentacles were like smoke, penetrating, infecting, spreading. No, I told myself. No, it's not you, Mike. But still, the thought did not leave me. Do I want to save Sarah from that place? Before I could get rid of this terrible thought, my sister and children burst into the house. By tacit agreement, we put aside discussion of Jean Kindred's visit and plunged headlong into bathing the children and preparing dinner. Jean's words echoed in my head, intertwined with memories of Sarah. Ugly words and tarnished memories. I hated how they distracted me and interfered with my time with the kids. God, I thought Cindy would never calm down, Carrie complained, falling onto the couch with her legs tucked under her. So what did the grief-stricken widow say? I don't know where to start, I began, handing her a glass of wine. First, Mike, tell me word for word what she said, and then we'll figure it out together. I recounted the conversation as best I could, stumbling only on the part that concerned Sarah's whereabouts. Carrie's sing said it all. Jean assured me that they were under orders not to force her to work or anything like that, but still. What are you going to do? Do you know? How to save people from there? I don't know the answers to all three questions. Okay, let's put rescue plans aside. When Sarah returns to Australian soil, what do you plan to do? I don't know. Carrie sighed. You don't know much, Mike. You're going to have to start making decisions. You need to have a plan. I know, but I still can't wrap my head around it all. I can't reconcile the Sarah of the ledgers and the Ferrari with the Sarah I loved for 12 years. One moment I see Sarah in yoga pants, making pancakes on a Sunday morning, and then I see her in one of those expensive dresses from the secret room, and I find it hard to believe that it's the same person. That's understandable. Her double life unsettled me too. Carrie paused, taking a sip of wine. How about we go back to basics and weigh the pros and cons? I nodded. What else could I do? So, we sorted everything out, and at the end, the divorce column looked pathetic. There were, of course, some big points there, such as trust and betrayal, but I had to admit that pride and ego also had their place. The anti-divorce column had a lot of material things like losing 60% of my assets, paying alimony, paying child support, having to live in a tiny apartment, but it paled in comparison to the emotional items. How could I live, seeing my children only on weekends? How could I bear not seeing my children every day? I loved reading fairy tales to them. I loved putting them to bed when they were sleepy and cuddled, smelling of soap and innocence. Even if I revealed Sarah's secret life to the court, there was a high probability that they would still give her custody. I can't believe what I'm about to say, but well. Just say it, sister. Have you thought about not saving Sarah? What? I looked at Carrie as if she had grown a second head. She was usually the epitome of kindness. I couldn't believe that she gave voice to my old thoughts. Is this no worse than what she did to you from the very beginning of your acquaintance? She cheated on you from the very beginning, lied to you every day that you knew her. As far as I understand divorce laws, if she doesn't come back in 2 years, then you can annul the marriage, or maybe it's still a divorce based on abandonment. So you won't lose everything you've earned, and your time with the kids won't be cut short. Leaving her in Mexico is that much worse than what she did to you all these years. You can always ask Kindred to make sure Sarah isn't touched. Would that be worse for the kids than a divorce? I sipped my wine, rolling Carrie's words over in my head. Even knowing the length and breadth of Sarah's deception and betrayal, and even though Carrie's words made sense, could I do this to Sarah? Could I have left her in Mexico? I turned my head to the side and looked at the clock radio. The display glowed a ghostly green, 12:27 am. I sighed and rolled over, turning my back to the painful numbers. Sleep did not come. Carrie's words kept repeating in my head. She cheated on you from the very beginning. Have you thought about not saving Sarah? Will this be worse for the children than divorce? Sarah hurt me terribly. It dealt such a blow to my heart that I wasn't sure if I would ever fully recover. She has left me questioning every single point of the past 12 years. Sarah from the secret room was a stranger to me, but I loved Sarah, who cried with joy in my arms when our children were born. I loved her with all my heart. Why? Why did she continue after we got engaged? I could understand that she was using her resources to cope with the financial crisis. I might not agree with her method, but I could understand. But after we got engaged, after we got married, I will never understand this. Images of Sarah from our life together turned into images of her driving a Ferrari in a blonde wig. I saw her in her favorite white dress, and then draped in one of the expensive dresses from the secret room. Which Sarah was the real one? How will I ever know? How can I believe anything she tells me again? How can I tell when she's being sincere and when she's acting? One thing I was sure of was that no matter what motivated her to have our children, she loved them. She couldn't pretend about it. Not knowing who my wife was, what her intentions were, where my children and I fit in, tormented me. I should have known. There must be some way to find out. Something was bothering me. I couldn't figure out what, but I knew it was in a secret room. Without thinking, I sat down and put my feet on the cold floorboards. With the baby monitor in hand, I went to Sarah's sewing room. I started on the envelopes and loose documents first. I didn't know what I was looking for, but again I trusted that I would know it when I saw it. Then I took up the books, taking the most current one. In my haste to open it, I dropped the loose pages from the back of the book onto the floor. I was going to ignore them, but instinct made me look down. The words caught my eye. For sale. Designs for life. A graphics studio in the city center is looking for a new owner. My brain began to frantically count. She was going to use at least some of her ill-gotten wealth to buy me my own design studio. She continued to sell herself for me. I might not agree with what she did, but she did it for the sake of her family. I fell to my knees. My eyes stung from tears. I had a place in Sarah's future. She loved me. A flood of love and relief filled my veins. Kindred's words echoed in her head. He did this because she tried to end their relationship with blackmail. Sarah tried to finish it. She must have thought she had earned enough for us. How she was going to explain the money to me remained a mystery. Perhaps an inheritance from an aunt or even winning the lottery. Regardless, she wanted to get out of it. Whether our marriage would survive or not was still a big question mark. How will I ever get the images of her with clients out of my head? How can I trust her again knowing her acting skills? She was able to deceive me for so long. But despite all her terrible misdeeds, she did not deserve the fate she was now experiencing. I had to save her. I had to get her out of the brothel. I prayed that Kindred knew where Arthur left Sarah. In the case of Shaw v. Shaw, I find in Mr. Shaw's favor and grant a dissolution of marriage for abandonment. Mr. Michael Shaw retains custody of all 3 children, as well as 100% of the marital assets. The rest of the judge's words fell silent. Everything was done. I was no longer married to Sarah. I was a free man. I was not filled with a feeling of victory or satisfaction, only sadness. I looked over my shoulder at Carrie. She smiled encouragingly. When the children were securely in bed, I poured myself some port and sat down on the veranda. The night was beautiful, but I barely noticed it, immersed in the past. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, the same questions running through my head as they had for the last 2 years. Did I make the right choice? Did I even have a real alternative? What kind of life did I condemn Sarah to? I shuddered, remembering that night. The night of my epiphany regarding Sarah's motives. I went to bed feeling relieved, but was awakened by the light of a flashlight shining in my face. I replayed the scene in my head. At the end of the world, I saw a man dressed completely in black, with a balaclava hiding his features, sitting on the edge of my bed. He was pointing a gun at me. I looked at the tip of the silencer inserted into the barrel. "Hello, Mr. Shaw. Great place you have here." The discrepancy between his words and the gun in his hand made me numb with surprise. I was sure that Jean Kindred had decided to take me out of the equation, as well as Sarah and her husband. This realization made me almost shit myself, convinced that I was about to meet a grisly end. My first thought was for my children, and without hesitation I began to beg for their lives. "Please don't kill my children. They don't know anything. They are innocent in all of this. I'm not here to kill you or your children, or at least not yet, Mr. Shaw, or can I call you Mike?" I nodded, slowly and carefully rising to a sitting position. I was confused. Why is he here if not to kill me? "So, Mike, tell me, where is that hot little wife of yours? She and I were supposed to meet today, and I'm sad that she missed our date. I hope she's not trying to get out of our deal." I looked at him blankly. He raised an eyebrow, changing the angle of the gun slightly. "I don't know where Sarah is. She disappeared over a week ago. You can ask the police. I filed a report." That's bad news, Mike. You see, Sarah was supposed to pay me the rest of the debt today. What are we going to do about it?" "What?" I shook my head in confusion. "Sarah owes you money? How much? For what?" Even as I asked questions, my brain began to connect the dots. We had a business agreement, half up front, half done. Well, let's just say job done. Business agreement? What job? "Mike, Mike, Mike," the man instructed. "If Sarah wanted you to know the details, she would tell you. All you need to know is that she owes me 20,000. Pass a message to your wife. I'll be back tomorrow at 2 o'clock to collect." "But I don't know where Sarah is. I can't get a message to her." "Then you'll have to pay for it." He stood up, leaning forward to gently run the tip of the gun across my cheek. "Repeat after me, Mike. 20,000 at 2 p.m. I did as he said. He sauntered towards the door as if he had all the time in the world. It didn't even occur to me to attack him when his back was turned to me. Something told me this guy could take care of himself. At the door, he turned around. "Oh, and Mike, beautiful kids, real cuties. I checked on them before I woke you up for our little chat." I jumped out of bed at his words, the sound of the man's quiet laughter echoing in my head as he walked down the stairs. One by one I checked on the children, tears streaming down my face from the sight grief when I found them sleeping peacefully, unharmed. The shock wore off, and I began to shake uncontrollably. I made my way to the living room on unsteady legs. I tried to think about his words, but my mind rebelled. I made him think. Suddenly, the unaccounted entry for $20,000 in Sarah's ledger made sense. Half before work, half later. The job was done. HM stands for Hitman, and he wanted his money. The task was to kill a person. Kill Arthur Kindred. Dispose of a human problem like a used tea bag. I was ill. Suddenly, all the inexplicable expressions I had seen on Jean Kindred's face made sense. Confusion and fear, a strange mixture, of course. It is not surprising that at that moment I could not understand them. I was so wrong. Jean Kindred was not the one who orchestrated her husband's murder. It was Sarah. I shook my head again and again, not wanting to believe the obvious. Despite everything Sarah had done, all her lies, all her deception, her betrayal, I struggled to believe that she was capable of murder. But she was. The man's words cursed her. We had, well, a business arrangement. All you need to know is that I am owed 20,000. Half down, half over. 20,000 at 14 o'clock. What can make a person commit murder? I could imagine almost any parent doing this to protect their partner or child. But is it pointless to take another person's life? What kind of person could do this? Sarah had known and been involved with Arthur Kindred for over 10 years, and by all accounts he had been generous to her. God, she was having sexual intimacy with him. So why do you want him dead? The only conclusion I could come to was from Jean Kindred's words. This was the second time Sarah had tried to end their arrangement, and Arthur clearly wasn't going to go away quietly. Sarah wanted to leave, but Arthur did not let her go. Did this justify her in organizing the attack on him? No, not in my book. It would seem that he posed no physical threat to me or the children, but only to Sarah, who kept her secret. She killed a man to avoid revealing the truth. It was truly terrible. Is she capable of treating me with the same cold and hard logic? The night passed without sleep. The next morning, I took the kids to school and Cindy to Carrie. I didn't tell Carrie anything about what happened. There will be time for this later. I used the money from the secret room to make an envelope for the killer. The situation was ironic on many levels. Arthur Kindred essentially paid for his murder by paying the ultimate price for kidnapping Sarah. And Sarah? Well, at that very moment she was locked in a brothel because her hitman killed Arthur when he was about to free her. She was responsible for her own imprisonment, not me, not Arthur. She did this to herself. At exactly 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Hello, Mike. Knowing the guy's purpose for coming to my door and his profession made his excessive friendliness seem sinister. The envelope was in my hand, but I did not immediately hand it over to him. With my heart pounding, I asked the question that had kept me up all night. How do I know that once I pay you what Sarah owes you, you won't come back again? His face of surprise, followed by hurt, gave way to his fake smile. I'm a professional, Mike. Sarah and I had a business arrangement, and as soon as you hand over this envelope, our business with each other will be completed. I nodded and gave him the money, praying I wasn't making a mistake. I mean, how reliable are the words of a man living outside the law? I watched him leave. Perhaps it was my imagination or my knowledge of what he did for a living, but everything about him radiated danger. His words from last night were repeated. Oh, and Mike, good kids, real cuties. I checked them before I woke you up for our little chat. Something told me that for the right price, he would have no problem killing a child. And Sarah brought him into our lives, in the lives of our children, our sweet, innocent children. This knowledge made all her other misdeeds seem like drops in the ocean. No matter how terrible her years of lies were, no matter how painful the knowledge of her betrayal or the torturous images of her having sex with other men, they pale in comparison to the fact that she risked her well-being, the very lives of our children. It was unforgivable. At that moment, I realized that my decision was made for me. One of my most important jobs as a father was to protect my children. The horror was knowing that I needed to protect them from their own mother. Sarah committed a crime for which, if caught and tried by a jury, she would have been sentenced to life in prison. Because of something as simple as bad timing, she trapped herself in a Mexican location for about the same amount of time. Karma definitely bit her in the ass. Taking a deep breath, I returned to the present and took a sip of port. I love my children immensely and will do everything I can to protect them. This meant that it would take time to fully come to terms with my decision to leave Sarah in Mexico. This was the price of what I had to do as a father. Jean couldn't miss the investigation into her husband's murder. The police acted carefully, to put it mildly. Although she was innocent and no charges were ever brought, she had accumulated enough dirt that she was ostracized by her former friends and excluded from the society she had sacrificed so much to be a part of. Jean never married again. Having no children, grandchildren, or real friends, she was unable to enjoy her extraordinary wealth and died a lonely woman. She kept her word and never mentioned Mike to the police. Apparently, she was more afraid of bad publicity than a police investigation. After a 2-year investigation, police concluded that Arthur Kindred was killed by Mexico's Cortez cartel for running a shelter for battered wives and unmarried mothers, where many of the wives of lower-ranking cartel members had fled. Mike sold the house he shared with Sarah. The couple who bought it were delighted to have a secret room. Mike took great pains to show both opening mechanisms. Mike bought a new house closer to his sister Carrie, which included a detached four-car garage and an apartment, which he converted into his graphic design business. Using some of Sarah's $1.6 million in secret earnings, he was able to find time to build his business from the ground up, as well as hire a full-time housekeeper nanny for James, Jenny, and Cindy. Over time, Mrs. Knowles became a pseudo-grandmother to the children. 5 years after Sarah disappeared, he met Diana, a young single mother. The beginning of their relationship was rocky as they each had a lot of baggage, but through persistence they finally found love, peace, and lasting happiness with each other. Ironically, Mike ended up having 4 children. Diane's son, Ryan, who was a year younger than Mike's son, Jamie, fell in love with Cindy when he returned home from college and discovered that she was already an adult. But that's another story. Oh, and DNA tests confirmed that Michael was the biological father of all 3 of his children. Being a true professional, the hitman never bothered Mike and his family again. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.